Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Renfrew Center Foundation's webinar, Values, Discovery, in Recovery. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Erin Byerly, and I'm your Alumni Services Coordinator, and I'll be your moderator for today's online presentation. Before I introduce you all to today's presenters, Gabby DeParis and Raven Scott, I want to go over a few announcements and to give others a little bit of extra time to join. So first off, we are very excited to let you all know that almost all of our sites, so most of the sites have returned to in-person day treatment services. And if you visit our website, renfrewcenter.com, you'll be able to find a list there of the exact sites offering in-person programming. So definitely check that out. Another exciting event we have coming up will be our fall non-residential alumni workshop. So we'll be exploring the topic weathering change with courage and compassion during this in-person and virtual workshop. So we're going to have both options. So sites that have returned to in-person programming will be welcoming back alums to come together, connect, and even share a meal together. And for those who aren't ready or aren't able to return in person, we are going to be hosting virtual events for the East Coast, Central, and West Coast time zones. So the events are going to be on either October 11th, 12th, or the 18th, and you can go and register for them now on the events page at renfrewcenter.com. And as we head into fall, we've got exciting webinars planned. Next month, we're going to be hearing from Erica Butler, the site director at the Renfrew Center, Charlotte, about recovery during Halloween. So we are also still hosting our residential alumni support group monthly. This is a virtual group, and the next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, October 11th from 4 until 5 p.m. We're also hosting our weekly BIPOC and SAGE outpatient groups if you're looking for more specific support related to that area of your life and recovery. So if you're interested in any of those, you can reach out to 1-800-RENFREW, learn more about them, and kind of get set up with them. Or you can always check out the events page at renfrewcenter.com, get registered for anything that interests you. And as always, if at any point in time now or in the future you feel like you need more support, you can give us a call at 1-800-RENFREW, and we are happy to help figure out what makes the most sense for you. So following our webinar today, we would love your feedback. You all will be receiving an evaluation form via email that we're asking you to complete online. This form really helps us figure out what are the areas we need to be focusing on. We can develop new and innovative programs and, tailor our webinars to things that really are important to you all and your recovery. We'll also be doing a question and answer session after Raven and Gabby finish their presentation today. You can submit questions at any time during the webinar by typing them into the chat function, but make sure it's going to all panelists and not everyone. So now I would like to introduce you to today's presenters. Raven Scott, APC MS NCC, is the team lead at the Renfrew Center of Atlanta. Raven is a two-time graduate of Jacksonville State University, receiving a master's degree in clinical mental health in 2020. Raven is currently a second-year PhD student pursuing a degree in counselor education and supervision at Mercer University. Raven has a background in substance use, eating disorders, and treating individuals with mental health comorbidities. Raven is an active member of the American Psychological Association and the National Board of Certified Counselors. And presenting along with Raven is Gabby DeParis, MS LAPC NCC, a lot of letters you both have. And Gabby is a primary therapist and alumni representative at the Renfrew Center of Atlanta. Gabby is a graduate of Providence College, where she received a bachelor's degree in theater and psychology in 2018, and Georgia State University, where she received her master's degree in clinical mental health counseling in 2022. Gabby enjoys incorporating values work when treating individuals recovering from eating disorders, as well as exploring the impact of media and culture on body image. She is an active member of the American Counseling Association and the National Board of Certified Counselors. So who could be better presenters on this than these two? So Raven and Gabby, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Erin. So a good place to start for this webinar is just figuring out what are values. So values are fundamental beliefs that guide or motivate our attitudes and actions. Similar to a lighthouse or a compass or a guidepost, values help provide us with a sense of direction as we navigate through our lives. Values also help us determine what is important to us. And there are many external influences on what should be important, such as society, the workplace, friends, family, which all can be overwhelming to navigate. Our values usually become a combination of those things, but how they're internalized, prioritized, and lived out are unique to each of us. What we hold as most important often changes over time and is based upon current experiences. For example, someone who has just graduated college and entered the workforce may value freedom and achievement, but after getting married may start to value family and connection more. Values are also the personal qualities that we choose to embody to guide our actions, meaning the kind of person that we want to be, how we treat others and ourselves, and how we interact with the world around us.
Yeah, also I'll add to that values can be very similar to what some may call our character. When others see us and interact with us, they may see how we connect with them through our values, and they can call that our character based on the interactions. So it's important to think about what our values are, because that is how others may interpret our interactions with them. And that's why we want to focus on that in recovery. In addition to that, it's also important to recognize that over the course of our lives, our values can change. They may change due to experiences with relationships, trauma that we may experience, or education, or any other experience that may have had a lasting impact on us. You may begin to go to a different school at a certain age. During adolescence, that impacts your value system, or you may go to a college away from your parents, and that may change your values as you begin to develop your own identity away from your family's belief systems. In addition to those things listed, losing a loved one could impact your value system. Any religious or spiritual beliefs you may have could change or demonstrate what's important to you through values. Also, any personal beliefs that you hold could also impact your personal value system. So why is it important to identify your values and normalize that they change over the course of your lifetime? Normalizing this change promotes rediscovering your values while you're in recovery. It's in essence giving yourself permission to go on a self-discovery journey where you ask yourself the important questions of what's important to you. And in recovery, that's important because we're asking you to move away from the eating disorder and what the eating disorder values are, and begin to look into what is important to you and what your values may be. And when you find those can help you remind you of what's important while you're in recovery and why you're going through this process.
So how do we identify what our values are? There are many ways in which we can begin to more specifically identify our personal values, including a personal values card sort, which is an activity that's usually facilitated by a professional in which clients sort through a deck of cards containing individual values by categorizing them into 5 piles based on personal level of importance. These piles being not important to me, somewhat important to me, very important to me, and most important to me. And the process is repeated until there are only 3 to 5 cards remaining in the most important to me pile. And these cards are said to represent one's core values. There's also a life values inventory, which is a worksheet containing 42 items regarding beliefs that guide people's behavior related to 15 major life values. Example items include challenging myself to achieve. Each item is rated on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being almost never guides my behavior, and 5 being almost always guides my behavior. And scores for each of these items related to the same life value are then added together to kind of determine an overall score for 15 different values. The higher the overall score you end up with for the life value, the more important you consider it to be. And then another more indirect way of specifically identifying our values can be through journaling or guided questions.
And if I add to that, I would also say that we could identify our values through conversation. So having conversations with family members, friends, loved ones, people in classes with us at school can lead us on a journey of self-discovery and rediscovering our values. Also, any current events that are happening could impact your value system. Seeing your friends or family members and loved ones being impacted by current events or politics or things in the media, that could also bring to the forefront of what's important to us and lead us on a journey of values rediscovery by giving us an impression of what our values may be, if they are changing, and why that's important to you.
So here are some examples of guided questions and or journal prompts that you can utilize to start thinking a little bit more about your values. One being creating a list of 3 to 5 people you look up to. For example, mine would probably include some family members and friends, maybe coworkers, and then asking yourself, what do you admire about them? Maybe it's that they're always there for you. They're not afraid to stand up for themselves or what they believe in. And then from that, asking yourself, what qualities and or values do they embody? So maybe that's compassion, kindness, self-respect. Another journal prompt or guided question that you can utilize is considering a meaningful moment or peak experience from your life. What was happening to you? What was going on? Who were you with? For example, a couple of years ago, I went on a trip to Spain with my family, and that might suggest that I valued at that time family and connection and adventure and exploring all the different cities we went to. And then a third potential guided question or journal prompt is imagining that it's your birthday 10 years from now and your friends and family are asked to give speeches about you. What would you want them to say and why? So maybe you'd want them to say that you're a person who gives their all, who cares about what they do and the people in their life. Maybe that you're someone that they can always reach out to. And then what are the underlying values represented in each response? So utilizing that example, maybe it would be determination, resilience, loyalty, ambition, authenticity. So again, this is a little bit more of an indirect way to identify your values, which potentially puts a little bit less pressure on yourself to pick through a list. So how are these values related to eating disorder treatment? So eating disorders often have their own set of values, which are usually not the same as our personal values. So if you look below, examples of potential eating disorder values might be achievement, so trying to achieve a certain body, shape, or size. Maybe it's control, kind of over behaviors, what food we're eating, what not. Discipline, whether that's related to eating or physical activity or whatnot. The eating disorder potentially also values dishonesty and being secretive about behaviors and not being as open with loved ones. Perfection is often a value of the eating disorder, in addition to rules, so food rules and whatnot, rituals. These are all some potential values that the eating disorder holds. Whereas on the right-hand side, someone may personally value adventure, authenticity, connection, creativity, freedom, and honesty. And these values, often our personal values, are almost in opposition of the eating disorder's values, or the eating disorder's values get in the way of us fully living the personal values that we hold. And you can often tell which set of values you're currently living by based upon how you're feeling about yourself and your life. So if you're finding yourself frequently feeling frustrated or dissatisfied or bored or maybe even depressed, it's likely because you're disconnected from your personal values. And as a result, the choices you make on a day-to-day basis may not support or reflect what matters most to you. When you feel that your life is full of purpose, joy, meaning, fulfillment, you're likely living more closely in alignment with your own personal values. And motivation for recovery can and oftentimes is found by recognizing ways in which your eating disorder's values prevent you from living that authentic and fulfilled life that comes from living by our values.
ED's values are different than mine, and I want my freedom back. So this quote really does embody why it's important to focus on your values in recovery. If you've ever felt that your eating disorder values are different than your personal values, or if you felt that there's a lot of conflict within yourself, that could indicate that your personal values and the eating disorder values are conflicting within, and it can present issues with how you show up with others in your life, the loved ones in your life, how you approach your treatment process, your recovery process. So this picture may resonate with you. And then on the next slide, we're going to discuss how you can rediscover your values while you're in recovery. So when you begin to rediscover yourself through your values, you get to choose the type of person that you want to be and who you want to show up as. Values rediscovery can look like challenging your core beliefs. That may include utilizing some of those UT skills that we have in our treatment program, such as the downward arrow, to look into core beliefs more closely and to challenge them and replace them with some of your own personal values. Rediscovering yourself can also look like building growth fostering relationships, making those important connections with others that may have diminished when you were actively engaging in the eating disorder behaviors. When we look at our values, we can then see how to begin reestablishing those connections that we may have lost. And it can look like also reconnecting with yourself. And by that, we mean utilizing some of those mindfulness skills, paying attention to your body, your mind, your emotions, and what you're feeling that leads you to identifying what your values are and how they may be changing. Rediscovering yourself through your values can also strengthen your recovery voice, which is very important. When your ED voice is really loud, it can help identify ways to challenge it by thinking of what you value in your life in that moment to combat that ED voice when you're struggling. So discovering your values can help guide you on your road to recovery. It's very important to rediscover your values while you're in the recovery process because it can help you and guide you on that road. Identifying your values can change your perspective in life, as Gabby mentioned earlier, bringing in those things of connection, authenticity, honesty. Values discovery can also highlight what you desire from life, bringing in what you actually want to do, so it can allow you to set goals for your future, short term or long term. In addition to that, it goes hand in hand with reminding you of what's important in life. What do you find significant in your life that you want to focus on while you're in recovery? It can also guide you on how to show up for others in your life. So if we think back to growth fostering relationships, being mutual. And lastly, values reflection can help you when making tough decisions. So when you feel that there's conflict within your ED values and personal values may be battling, and you're unsure of what to do next, thinking about what you value in life in that moment can help make things a little clearer and make those decisions a little bit easier.
And one of the first modules that we utilize in our UT model is related to motivation, and there's an activity on values associated with the module. And I don't find it coincidental that we start to incorporate values work in the initial engaging motivation stage, which of course is potentially what prompted this idea of incorporating how we can not only utilize our values in treatment, but also in our recovery journeys as well. So living a value-driven life or a values-driven life is kind of a goal of identifying and starting to live out those values. We want to live a life that is driven by our personal values rather than the values of the eating disorder. Because when we do choose to live by our values, we're also choosing to live a life that's driven by happiness, by purpose, by clarity due to that lack of conflict moving forward, a life full of zest and authenticity, kind of as Raven was saying about showing up for ourselves and for others. When we're living by our own personal values, we're enabling ourselves to be our authentic selves unapologetically. So with all that, what is something that each of you can do today to start living more closely in alignment with your values? If your values connection, who's a friend or a family member that you can reach out to, maybe schedule a phone call with or a Zoom call? If your value is adventure and curiosity, what's a new place you can go visit? What's a new nature preserve that you can go walk through? These are just some initial ways in which we can make decisions on living a values-driven life on a daily basis.
Yeah, and to add to that as well, it does take time to rediscover those values. So while you're in your recovery process, if you feel that it's taking a little bit longer, that's okay, and that's normal. We want you to take your time in developing your new character, the new person that you want to be, and identifying what your values are so you can take them with you on your journey to recovery.
Well, Gabby and Raven, I want to thank you both so much. I feel like this is such an important topic when it comes to recovery and, you know, the identity piece of like figuring out, okay, who am I without the eating disorder and letting go of that. So I know we've already got a couple of questions. We can start off with y'all. But if people have more, please feel free to add them to the chat. If we're unable to get to them today, we will pass them on to Raven and Gabby so that they can answer them for us. But the first question is just, is it normal to feel like you're kind of losing yourself in some way when you let go of some of those eating disorder values?
So I just, short answer being yes, and then a little bit more of an explanation being that the eating disorder itself becomes a strong part of our identity as it's developing and maintaining itself. And I also feel that that's why the eating disorder has its own set of values, because it's its own identity. And when we're starting to let go of those values, then we're also letting go of the identity that almost sometimes feels like it's morphed into our own identity at the same time. And it's scary. It's scary. And I often hear people say that they don't know who they are without the eating disorder, which is why I start then to incorporate more values work, because I feel it's a really good starting point on finding who you are and what you care about as you're letting go. And it's almost a grieving process as well, in terms of like letting go of not only those values, but that identity as well. And through that values rediscovery, not only in recovery, but also in the treatment process, we're starting to build and solidify a newer and more authentic identity to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're totally right, Gabby. Like it's its own entity, and that whole idea of the grieving process. Anything more you guys can say on kind of that grieving process that might happen as kind of we begin to work on developing or finding our new values outside of the eating disorder, and kind of what that process might look like in terms of grieving the old values or grieving the eating disorder itself?
Yeah, that's a great question, Erin. I would definitely say that you used the perfect word with that, and that it is a process, right? And so there's no correct amount of time that you have to grieve those ED values while you are reestablishing your personal values. And it looks different for everyone. And I know sometimes we can have habits of comparing ourselves to others, how far along we've made it versus someone else. And it's important to create space for yourself to grieve that as you let go of those ED values and move away in that transition period, and also create space for yourself to identify what you value in your life and what you want to put emphasis on going forward. So I think additionally, it comes down to just creating that space for that process, giving yourself permission to grieve that, and then also space as well to build up the type of person that you want to be based on your values.
Definitely that approach rather than avoid kind of standpoint that we utilize during UT groups.
Yeah, and Raven, I love that you put in there that there isn't a time limit. Like, I think we can all probably think of, whether it's someone or something we've lost and had to grieve, and, it could be years and years, decades later, and you still, have that moment of, oh, I really miss that.
Yeah.
And being okay with the fact that that might be part of the recovery process also. And saying like, I can miss that and not have that be a part of my value anymore and who I am anymore. Yeah. So I guess this kind of goes into our next question of like, why are values important in recovery? Like, why do I need them? Why do they have to change?
Yeah. So kind of going back to some of the things that Gabby and I have discussed, it can seem kind of trivial at first, like, why do I need to talk about my values? But if we really look at recovery long term, right, and adhering to that recovery focused life, that means replacing those old behaviors, those old actions, those old tendencies with new ways of living, things that you find important. And so taking the time in recovery to really focus on what's important to you, changing your perspective on life. So in terms of moving away from isolation into connection, dishonesty versus honesty, it's important to put those things on the forefront of your mind. Use that for motivation to get you through those really hard times of recovery, because they can be very hard, and be a good reminder of what you're doing this for. Maybe your family, maybe your life, maybe your education, maybe spiritual or religious beliefs. maybe your relationships. So it can really put things into perspective if you look through it in a different lens versus the ED value lens.
Mm. Yeah, adding on to that, it's often, at least for me too, like I think it's important to be able to see the way in which the eating disorder inhibits our ability to live our life worth living. It's not even necessarily always about recovery. It's about coming back home to you and who you are. And values is just one way that you can do that, because, kind of with the examples that I gave, and if anyone noticed, right, like I purposely had those arrows opposing each other or facing opposite of each other, because very often it's that those eating disorder values not only conflict or maybe opposite to our personal values, especially with like that dishonesty versus honesty. The eating disorder values can and often do get in the way of us being able to actually live out our own personal values, with connection. The eating disorder is a very isolating disorder. And it's whether it's about the next time that I can engage in a behavior or just having a lack of energy to be around other people, those values of the eating disorder and the rules and the control can get in the way of that connection.
Well, yeah, and I love that that idea that there's sometimes that disconnect, whether it's with people or even with like awareness of our own values. You guys both brought up like the honesty and dishonesty, and that idea of if we value honesty and the eating disorder is leading to dishonest behavior, we're not kind of living in line with that value. And the number of times I have, I can think of having worked with someone and them saying, no, I totally value honesty. And I'm like, so then what's going on over here? And, not even having that awareness because the eating disorder's so sneaky. But yeah, I love that idea of really, it really is so important, I think.
Yeah.
How can people use values to kind of help support them as they're going through treatment? Because I think, that's the hard part too. Okay, I'm going through treatment. I'm doing this really hard work. I'm approaching as opposed to avoiding. How can these values even be an additional support for me?
Yeah, so using your values to support you in recovery, if we go back to thinking about those really hard moments of recovery, those days where we don't want to make that drive to the treatment center, those days where we don't want to get up and log on to Zoom if we're doing virtual programming, right? So that's why I think it's so important to identify, one, what the ED values are. That way we can see and distinguish them from our personal values and use this to kind of propel us into recovery when we don't feel like taking, another bite at a really tough meal, thinking about what is my long-term goal? How do I want to show up in life after this recovery treatment process and recovery after the treatment ends? What do I want in life? So I think it's really fundamental in the treatment process and understanding how this is going to change my life. How do I want to take control back over my life from the ED and show up by living a values-based life?
And kind of as I said earlier too about, I don't think it's coincidental that in the initial module related to motivation, there's a values-based activity. Identifying or starting to identify some of our values early on in treatment is really helpful, because it then becomes a point of reference for kind of examining or thinking about the decisions that we're making and why. Oftentimes I utilize the question of, whose values am I living by right now? Or if I were to engage in this behavior, is that honoring my values, or is that honoring the values of the eating disorder? Like, whose values am I really acting upon right now? So I often feel that utilizing that question in times of not only discomfort or distress, but even just in considering engaging in a behavior, asking ourselves, how is this in alignment with the eating disorder's values, or how is it in alignment with mine? And also then, whose values do I actually want to be living by?
Yeah, I guess that's another question we've got kind of coming in is what do we do when maybe our values and even our recovery values aren't in line with maybe some of the values of the people around us or our family of origin or things like that? Any thoughts on how someone can handle kind of that disconnect that can happen when, well, I'm valuing this, but the people who are my supports or maybe were my supports don't necessarily share that value?
I initially would say the first thing that came to my mind was be compassionate with yourself, and understand that just because your values may not be in alignment with someone else's doesn't mean that you still don't have that foundational relationship. And if we're calling them your supports, right? Ideally, they're supporting you no matter what your values are, and it's the recovery that they're supporting. And again, being compassionate with yourself through that process, especially as not only are you kind of recognizing that your values might not match up with others, is also like you're rediscovering yourself. I know we keep using that word, but that's a very vulnerable time. And that's an additional reason as to why the compassion is so important. And then depending on the circumstance too, I'm even thinking about how do we potentially honor both our values and the values of our supports when we're with them, so that each part of you and the person that you're with feels honored, and able to be authentic with one another.
And to add to that, I would say that it's kind of the perfect opportunity to give ourselves space to acknowledge our uniqueness, right? So our experiences are what inform us in our behaviors and our interactions with others, and also contribute to our value system. So our experiences may be different from those of our support system or friends or loved ones and individuals that may be in the treatment process with us as well. So giving ourselves permission to be different, to be unique, to hold different values, also while respecting others, as Gabby mentioned, in our support system and their value system. I think it's about just embracing that transition period and saying, hey, it's okay that mine differ from this person's because I've been through something different and this is what I prefer. So again, regaining that control over your life and who you want to be as a person.
Yeah, that idea of uniqueness is so powerful,
Yeah.
embracing that and saying, yeah, this is me. I'm going to have different ones than somebody else. And that's okay. That's because we're all meant to be unique and different.
Yeah.
And there's no right or wrong when it comes to values, it's just what we hold as important, and there's no right or wrong in that. And that's actually, especially with the values card sort, that's something that is kind of one of the prompting discussion points of this is about what you value, not what you think you should or what you've been told to. And even whoever's facilitating it, oftentimes will say, try to let go of any potential judgment that you may feel can come from me in you recognizing some core values that maybe are not the same as mine, because there's no right or wrong.
Yeah, such an important part, Gabby. Such an important part. Thinking about like the different ways we work on figuring out values. Any thoughts on like value collage vision board kind of ideas or something like that?
I think the more creative, the better. right? So if you're anything like me, I'm definitely a visual person. I would definitely encourage a values vision board. I love the journaling aspect that Gabby brought in. I love self reflection, conversation, learning through others, any way that benefits you. I would say be more creative with it. Absolutely.
It's so funny you ask this, Erin, actually, because I personally have done a values card sort on multiple occasions, because they do change over time. And the most recent time that I did it, I challenged myself to get down to 3. And then on the cards that I physically had, because they do sell them in decks too, in addition to being able to print one off for yourself. I took a picture of the 3 cards and it became my phone background for a pretty significant period of time. And then in addition to that, I have facilitated some values card sorts during values groups during treatment. And the last time that I did that, I gave them each a piece of paper to tape their values onto to potentially even put in the front of their treatment binders.
I love that idea, Gabby, of like making sure it's something we're seeing continuously, we're reevaluating periodically. I mean, you guys talked about the transition times in life. I mean, yes, we're treatment and recovery, major transition time.
Mhm.
Even thinking though, like just, the fall, going back to school, like finishing out a vacation, whatever it might be, like finding those times where you kind of give yourself a chance to check in and say, are these things still what they were? Or have I grown? Have I developed? Have I changed over time? Yeah, that's great. One kind of last one, any like internal obstacles we might be running into when we try to live that more values driven life, try to get away from the eating disorder values? Any that you guys can think of that we can kind of have our alums on the lookout for as they do some of this values work?
Yeah. The very first thing that popped into my mind would definitely be just those core beliefs that we talked about briefly earlier. Those can be really, really hard to kind of navigate around, to replace. But I think that brings to mind a term of intentionality, right? So if we're going through the recovery process and we're being intentional in recovery, I think it's important to remind ourselves of our values. So while we have our core beliefs on one side and we have our personal values that we have identified, it's important to be intentional about what you choose to live with that day and how much power you want to give each one of those. So using that to kind of motivate you through that process of making those decision-making skills, when you find that internally you're struggling with those core beliefs, thinking about those values that you want to live in alignment with in the recovery focused life. Mm-hmm.
It also can get really hard when you feel like you have a solid sense of your values and then start to potentially slip into that space of being judgmental or critical of yourself if you're not living by them. Getting into that place of shoulding yourself, I really do believe that I'm starting a theory in my mind about how the word should is the enemy of self-compassion. Mm-hmm. Just because the point of knowing your values is to help guide you. And oftentimes we may not always need that lighthouse or that compass or that guidepost. And so we don't necessarily have to very actively and consciously be making values-based decisions, because it does get to a point where we're just doing it unconsciously. But if we almost start to utilize them as points of like, did I do this today or did I not do this today? And then being upset with yourself for, oh my gosh, I made no values-based decisions today. I could definitely see a situation in which that could definitely create some internal conflict.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think that idea of the core beliefs, the should statements, all of that coming together. Good pitfalls for us to be on the lookout for as we move forward. I believe those are all the questions we have now. If we didn't get to any, we do have Raven and Gabby's contact info on our last slide. And you guys will have seen on the slide previously, we do have a few more webinars coming up. So we hope to see you all there. If you have any questions, you can also reach out to alumni@renfrewcenter.com, and we will pass this along to Gabby and Raven. And please don't forget to fill out your evaluation form tomorrow when it is emailed to you. So on behalf of the Renfrew Center Foundation, our alumni and the alumni services team, Gabby and Raven, I want to thank you both so much for this presentation. I think it's just so helpful to have this chance to come together, talk about values work as we start again in the fall. Thank you all for being here today. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.